And so it's my pleasure to introduce Johann Caro-Burnett. He's a associate professor of economics at Hiroshima University. He got his PhD from Yale University, and he works in the intersection of game theory and causal inference with applications in political economy, public policy, and institutional design. And today he's going to talk about electoral competition with hidden motivations. Oh, it's yours, Johann. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So first of all, I want to apologize because I was not very aware of what was my audience. Initially, I prepared slides looking of an purely econ audience, but then told me no, they are not all economists. So I had basically 2 days to change my slides, and I didn't have time to practice. So let's see how it goes. The second thing is that this is more like a Frankenstein model in the sense that it has, I will explain it later, but it has 2 parts. And the second part is a paper that I was trying to publish a while ago, and it didn't go very well. So I added a first stage to it. So the basic motivation I had, how it started especially, is that we often see that during elections, especially in elections where there are 2 very strong candidates, most of theories would anticipate that these candidates would try to, compete as much as possible in order to achieve like a bare 50-50 share of the votings, right, of the votes. More than that is too expensive. I want to win but I want to win by a margin. I don't want to spend too much of my resources. So in campaigning, in whatever you want, it's kind of wasteful to win by 60%, 70%, 80%. And now, in reality, we often observe that candidates don't always, elections don't always end up with 50-50%. Sometimes it's 55-45, sometimes it's 60-40, sometimes it's something crazy like 70 or more versus 30 or less. So in order to rationalize this behavior, I came up with the following idea that there are different types of politicians, and I'm going to focus in 2 types that I think would be relevant: rent seekers, who just want to extract resources from nation, and policy-oriented candidates who they have good intentions, they are the nice guys, and they want to change this country, right? And these rent seekers, they have a higher value for holding office, whatever is value, economic value. It's something abstract. You can think of it whatever you want, in any way you want. And however, the difference is that the rent seekers have a higher valuation for being in office, but have a higher cost to implement policies. So in that sense, I want to study the case where we have potentially 2 types of candidates, and we don't know the types. They are hidden. We see candidates, they have policies, they have plans, they have a speech, but we can have beliefs what kind of candidates they are, but deeply we don't truly know. So the key idea of this study is that we don't really know the type of a candidate. We can have beliefs of it, but we don't know the type. So neither the rival candidate, neither the rival candidate knows the type of the other candidate or the voters. So the question is why. One of the main questions is why do highly motivated reformers, the nice guys, usually lose elections, even in competitive democracies? These guys want to make changes, they came to with good ideas, good plans, but in the end, they lose. So the key strategic tension in this paper is that I'm going to model it, as I said at the beginning, in two stages. First, candidates choose policy platforms. They make a plan. I'm going to make this reform. I'm going to make that reform. I'm going to change this policy. And then after they set a platform, after they announce a platform, they can engage in some form of vote buying or clientelism or however you want to call it. And so first stage, they announce a platform. Second stage, they buy votes, basically. All right. So stage one, platform selection. Stage two, electoral competition. And so the voters, when they come and they see, it's election day, they see the ballot and they say, okay, this candidate offer this policy, that candidate offer that policy, this candidate offer some kind of benefit like a cash transfer or some kind of reduction of taxes or something monetary, and I'm going, and the other candidate did something alike. So I'm going to evaluate these two proposals and I'm going to vote, right? So the second stage, where the candidates offer something nice to the voters, highly resembles a bidding contest. And for those who don't know about auction theory, this is basically what we call first price auction, in which bidders announce a secret or simultaneously, let's say, offer something, and the auctioneer sees the offers and picks the highest one. So in this case, the auctioneer is the voter and the bidder is the candidate. So the candidates offer something good, cash transfer or whatever you want, and the voters observe that and make an evaluation and choose the one that is more convenient to them. So the key constraint here is that these candidates have kind of a budget. You can see it as a budget in the literal sense or in more an abstract way, in that my valuation, my value to sitting in office, that serves as a budget to me. I cannot bid more than what I value for sitting in office. So that's some kind of constraint. And as I said, this electoral competition highly resembles a first price auction. So candidates bid with transfers, monetary incentive if you want, and the strongest candidate can outbid the other. So the one that has a higher valuation can outbid the one with the lower valuation. And therefore, the one who wins depends on how much each candidate values sitting in office. And so that would be the second stage. On the first stage, candidates announce platform, and these platforms serve as a signaling device. So at the moment when they announce, oh, I'm going to reform this policy, I'm going to make this change in the constitution or whatever, those announcements can somehow signal what kind of candidate we are observing, either a rent seeker or a reformer. For example, strong reform commitments suggest a policy-oriented candidate, right? So therefore, platform selection announcements act as a signaling device. And this signaling has strategic consequences. One candidate can pretend to be the other. So if, let's say, I'm a rent seeker, I can pretend to be the reformer by offering something very good. Right? So because of I'm going to talk, okay, so I'm going to talk about that later. So when I mentioned that the second stage where candidates offer transfers, we can see that as a first price auction. So on the second stage, behaves, as I said, as a first price auction. Each candidate offers benefits to voters. Offering more helps to win. Offering less makes my chances of winning less likely. And the constraint is, as I said, that you cannot offer more than what you value for being in office. So that serves as a sort of budget. And the reason why platforms matter strategically is because the selection of platform can signal or not what kind of candidate I am. And therefore, it is just this is something common that economists use very often, that is called a Nash equilibrium in a signaling model. And there are two types of equilibria. So an equilibrium in game, for those who don't know, in game theory, an equilibrium is a strategy. I set a strategy. This is my complete action plan. If I observe this, I do this. If I observe that, I do that. That's my strategy. An equilibrium is a pair of strategies from these two candidates, such that given what the other one is doing, I'm doing my best. And given what I'm doing, the other one is doing his best. That would be an equilibrium. So in this setup, there are two classes of equilibria. One is called pooling equilibrium, in which both candidates, rent seeker and reformer, they select the same platform. They announce the same platform. That would be a pooling equilibrium, right? And then there is a separating equilibrium, in which the rent seeker offers a very low policy reform, and the policy-oriented candidate offers a high reform. So if we observe different policy announcements, one is much promising than the other, we know that the higher one is the nice guy, the good politician. But if we observe that they are both the same, we don't learn anything. We don't know who is who. That would be pooling equilibrium. So when these platforms look similar, candidates cannot infer each other's motivation. I don't know if the other one is a rent seeker. I know my type. I know I'm a rent seeker. I don't know if the other is a rent seeker of a policy-oriented candidate. And then competition will focus on transfers, because I don't know, I didn't learn anything about the other candidate. If I want to win, my winning strategy will be entirely based on these transfers, on this vote buying or clientelism, according to call it. And therefore, rent seekers bid aggressively to attract voters. Because I have a higher valuation to be in office, I don't know the type of the other candidate, but I know that if the other candidate is the policy-oriented, his valuation is low, and my valuation is high, so I can beat anything around this gap, right? So in this kind of equilibrium, I'm not going to go through the math, but the rent seeker is going to randomize, is going to pick random transfers, clientelistic transfers, if you want to call it, is going to randomly pick something between my valuation and the valuation of the policy-oriented candidate. Because candidates differ in how much they value office, the stronger type, which in this case is the rent seeker, can bid more. And therefore, we can expect large electoral margins. So this model can rationalize the behavior I was saying at the beginning, that we can observe not necessarily 50-50 vote share, but maybe 60-40 or even 70-30, depends on how they randomize. And that can happen in an equilibrium, even when both are the same type, even if both are rent seekers, because they are going to pick randomly between this gap, right, low and high valuation, they're going to pick a number randomly. It could be that I pick randomly high, and the other one is also rent seeker, but randomly picked low, and that's going to generate a very large difference in the vote share. In the separating equilibrium, platforms reveal types. So the rent seeker is going to pick a very bad, I mean a very poor policy reform, and the motivated, the policy-oriented candidate is going to announce a very beneficial policy reform. So I know who is who. If I am a rent seeker and I observe that the other candidate is announcing many policy reforms, I know that he's a good guy, and I know his valuation for being in office is low, and therefore I'm going to bid just enough to beat him. And I'm going to bid whatever is his budget plus a penny, and I'm going to win the election with 51%. So this model predicts that in this separating equilibrium, the vote shares at the end of the election is going to be very close. It's going to be very close to 50-50, maybe 50.1 versus 49.9, something like that. So to summarize, there are two types of equilibria or regimes that can happen: pooling and separating. In the pooling, platforms are similar, platform announcements are similar, motivations remain hidden, we don't know who is who, and the fight happens during transfers. So platforms are at the same level, but the rent seeker transfers are on average higher than the transfers from the policy-oriented candidate. And this transfer happens randomly between, I'm sorry, in the vote, the difference between vote shares can be close to zero, but can be something very large. And that happens randomly. But this pooling equilibrium predicts the large gap between two candidates, even if they are ex ante identical, even if both happen to be rent seekers. In the separating equilibrium, we observe the opposite. One clearly announces a very good platform. I'm going to make a lot of changes. I'm going to reform this and that and that. The other one doesn't do much. So, but because of this difference in platform announcements, they learn each other's types. And because of that, transfers are almost identical. And that means that the vote margin is virtually zero. There is virtually no difference at the end of the election.
One clarification.
Yeah.
For both equilibrium, always the rent seeker wins. In one case with a large margin and the other one for it.
No, it's the policy candidate one on the right side, right?
As long as there is a rent seeker, he wins. If both happen to be policy oriented, then with the 50.
Provided there is, so in the case in which you have one rent seeker and one policy oriented, the rent seeker always wins.
Always wins. So this model. So the first thing is that this model rationalizes the large vote margin that we would observe, and then no other model predicts that. Second, it predicts that reformers often lose, right? So committing to strong reforms has a strategic cost. I announce that I'm the good guy, and therefore the bad guys let the rent seekers learn that. And when they learn that, they outbid me by a margin. So this implies that candidates may be willing to spend less to win election, and the robbers can exploit this weakness in the final bidding stage. Thus, even well-intentioned candidates, the good guys, the policy-oriented candidates, can become strategically disadvantaged. Another consequence is platform under provision. So the model predicts that if there is an optimal platform that would benefit the average voter, in equilibrium, there is platform under provision. The platform, the policy that would maximize let's say the welfare of this nation, that platform is going to be below that. And so basically that's it. The conclusions are just a summary. So I don't know if you have any questions. I can go through the math. I have separate slides.
So we have the rules now, so like no faculty first, no? So who wants to be first?
Hierarchy. Well, it's more complicated.
It's more
because
complicated.
it is, yes, it is about hierarchies, but yeah.
Who wants to go first? You, Scott, now you come. Scott here. Faculty.
What am I at this point? I'm always been a student.
Yeah.
I lurk, Jess. I'm always right over your shoulder.
Too soon, too soon.
Too soon? Was it too soon?
Too soon.
Any other questions?
I don't have a problem. Okay, thank you for the presentation. I don't know if I got into everything you said, but is there a way, thinking in terms of the one who goes to vote, the voter, of being able to see these candidates in separate platforms, meaning when their motivations are revealed at an optimal time? Like there's no study on this. It's just something's in my mind. Like I believe in probably the last, maybe more, even the 4 or 5 years, I haven't seen people really decide whom to vote the last 48 hours. Doesn't matter where you are. I mean, it's a perception of mine. There's no study on that I have read or anything. I just saw it in my country. I saw it in the neighbor. I saw it somewhere else. I'm not going to mention the countries, but my point is, is there a way that before going to vote to make a conscious voting, to being able to see all the candidates in these separate platforms?
I'm not sure if that expression is true. That
As I said, it's just something that's in my mind. There's no study or anything.
I think most people know who they're going to vote way in advance. Then maybe the marginal voter changes his mind at the end, and maybe those voters happen to be the pivotal ones. But I believe most people know who they're going to vote.
Some voters may be lying. Because I remember, I'm sorry, I promise not to say the names of the countries, but for the last Argentinian election, they were saying that one candidate.
Now you gotta get out. I'm kidding.
So sorry. Few days before, I'm not talking about 2 months, 3 months, few days before, they are tied, 50 to 50, 50 to 50. It was not a tie. There was a 16% of difference in the voting, in the final voting. Am I right? It was something around that.
Yeah, but there could be problems with the polling, the polls, no? So essentially they are serving people, and this is not a representative sample.
Well, I also saw it in my own country.
Yeah, I think they're having problems.
It's the same. It happened in another neighbor. So there's problems with the pollings everywhere. That's true, but
surveys are very noisy.
Yeah, but also could be. It could be a lot of things. It could be that the voters are lying. It could be that the voters don't want to say who are they voting for whatever reason.
Correct.
Right.
That's true.
So I don't like to say who am I going to vote for to nobody. So but that's another problem, right? But I think everybody wants to know the true candidate, right? Who is the real nice guy? Put in the terms of your presentation. So at what stage, or how can we able to how a voter can be able to figure out these separated platforms where the motivations of the politicians truly become revealed?
So the thing of this model is that even if we know who the nice guy is, the rent seeker will offer something very nice that many more people will want to buy for him, will want to vote for him. So this guy has revealed that he has a wonderful plan to make many reforms and change many things at the institutional level. But this other guy is going to offer me $100. Many people will vote for that.
But that's not a real motivation. He's not going to pay me $100. He's just saying he will.
I mean, that's a commitment problem. But then we cannot trust anyone then. So even if the guy who we believe is a nice guy and he's going to say make all these changes, we also don't have to believe him.
That's my point. That's not
so this model assumes commitment. Like if you say something, you will do it.
May I or
Well, maybe we could.
go?
It doesn't when it comes to policy, though, right? So they're only believable with the transfer. They're not believable with their platform choice.
They are really so everything is commitment. platforms and transfers.
Correct. So maybe I'll ask a couple of clarification questions that I think may help with this. So essentially, in some sense here, what you're assuming is that the platform is not a full description of the whole package that this politician is offering you. So after you offer the platform, and then after the other candidate also offer the platform and everybody observe that, then there is something else that you can do last minute, essentially, okay? And then that thing last minute essentially works as I go and buy votes, essentially, okay? So I can, through different mechanisms, it doesn't matter. And those things are not included in the original platforms, okay? So there is this separation of pieces of the platform, no? Okay, so that part, I think I buy that thing, okay? So, because I believe that there is a possibility of coming with last minute, with, something that will allow you to mobilize votes or whatever, okay? Okay, or there are circumstances in which you can buy that assumption, no? But then there is a second, I think, implicit assumption is that from the point of view of the voters, you can always flip the policy preferences, especially in the separating equilibrium, no? In the separating equilibrium, you know that the policy-oriented will give you more than the rent seeker. You can perfectly identify who is who, but you're assuming that the rent seeker always could come up with a way of buying votes that will overcome that calculation, okay? So what I think is like, it seems that with a small twist in the model, you can open up space for an equilibrium in which it's a good separating, no? It's a good separating in the sense that the rent seeker is separated from the policy oriented, and on top of that cannot reverse last minute, okay? And I think that will give you like 3 equilibria, will not change much your main story, but will open the door for a more kind of a classical possibility of like good separation, no? Something like that. And it's probably cheap to do it, technically speaking. Maybe not.
Right. Maybe I can come up with like some kind of mechanism that allows for that.
So look, it seems that the rent seeker is willing to pay up to this rent, and then policy oriented up to that rent. So that gives you some kind of maximum difference, okay? Then what you need is that the voter value the policy difference is more than that. So there is nothing that essentially the last minute can offer you the rent seeker.
The marginal value for policy is higher than the marginal value for transfer.
Exactly. And with that doesn't kill your other cases, but open the door for more classical case in which, the rent seeker cannot outbid you at the end of the road. Okay, so.
Hi.
So somebody else wants to add?
Thank you for the presentation. I would like that you could explain a bit more about this, because the key thing in the model is the motivation. As I understood, this hidden motivation or private motivation, real motivation. So really explain more a bit of this. How do you incorporate this motivation variable, let's say, in the model? And also if you have like examples of motivation that you could trying to understand the model, because I know that it's a model that you are trying, but probably if you have some examples of it.
So basically,
and one more thing, if this motivation thing is related like incentives of the people, I don't know how you can relate motivation with incentives to the people who are gonna vote. This is what I'm trying to understand the model.
so the word motivation is just to say, just to frame it in a way that people understand. mathematically just you have two types, one with higher valuation to be in office, one with lower valuation to be in office. That's it.
To be what?
Enough to sit in office,
Okay.
to win election, right? Because the rent seeker knows he's going to extract more resources or whatever from the nation. And the policy oriented doesn't care about that. He wants to just change and improve things, right?
So this might build on this and it may be more of a clarifying question, which is if we don't have a commitment problem here, and if either kind of politician does what they say they're gonna do, and is it the case that we care about their motivation only because it will be more expensive in the long run to have the rent seeker there? Because if they can commit either way, and they're gonna do the policies that they promised on the platform either way, and it's not about whether they're gonna follow through or not, then I don't care what their motivation is, right? Right, so help me understand why we should care what their motivation is.
Voters don't care. They just care that the one who overall offers the best deal, that I'm going to vote for that guy. I don't care if this guy offers me a bad platform, and at the end of like just before one day before election, he offers like an amazing transfer. I'm going to evaluate who offers me the better deal, and I'm going to vote for that guy. Now, as a researcher, so that's from the voter's point of view. So as a researcher, I'm just introducing a way to rationalize something that no other model has, I think, done it in a good way. That most models in this they call it stochastic voting models, predict that candidates would do something in order to win election, but in equilibrium, the vote shares will be 50-50. There are other ways to introduce noise, like there are subpopulations. They know that this population prefers this candidate and that population prefers the other candidate. And if you put boundaries on the size of the population and the distribution of their preferences, then you can get something with that doesn't end up in 50-50. But this is the only model, I think, that rationalizes a large vote margin in equilibrium, and it comes from the candidate side, not from introducing details or structure to the voting population.
Okay, but so how does this interface with? So you're saying essentially you're adding essentially to the median voter theorem in some way,
Yes.
right? To say that this is insufficient because it suggests this, and we have other ways of getting to these wide ranges of outcomes, and lots of reasons why the voter theorem is wrong. I think this is interesting. I'm sort of just trying to connect it back. So we're trying to explain this larger voting difference, right? That's the primary thing we are trying to explain outside of like misunderstanding information, right? Having limited information about candidates. Right? I'd be curious, like, are there competing theories for that outcome in terms of like, you seem to suggest no one is explaining a wide enough margin of the vote.
Yeah.
Where do the other ones come in on that? I'm just curious. I'm curious. I haven't visited this literature in a long time, but I'm just sort of curious. Like, what are the other explanations for larger gaps?
Heterogeneity vote population. So, like, we have certain well-defined subsets of populations, and this population prefers this candidate, that population prefers the other candidate. And as a politician, I know it's for me cheaper to buy this population or this state, this area, whatever. So I focus on that one. And this one is too expensive. I'm not going to touch that.
Okay. Got it. So then my question is really sort of similar to Gustavo's. Is there any world in which you build in a utility function that has different mixes of policy versus transfer value, right? So that like right where the voter responds based on how much they care about policy versus how much they care about whatever amount of transfer they're going to get. with the idea that maybe there's some, set of norms that shape whether voters care more or less about that.
Yeah, I can, so there's something I haven't done, but it's at least.
Would it be relevant for you? I guess.
Well, yeah, thank you.
Your model assumes that this is regardless of one being an incumbent or reported satisfaction in the population with a candidate.
So I don't. I mean, this model doesn't include the difference between who is incumbent and who is not. And it's potentially true that if we look into that and we look at the previous election, maybe the previous election there was a separating equilibrium and we would know the type of the candidate, but that's something I don't include.
One other suggestion, which is there's a really interesting paper that was just discussed on Not Another Politics podcast. I don't know if you, that's the University of Chicago. They choose a political science paper to discuss each week about honesty and politicians. And is it the case that politicians, essentially, that dishonest people select into, in their case, they're actually talking about the Chinese bureaucracy, but they have interest in expanding it. And they sort of find that using some really interesting methods that very much so, in fact, everyone that selects into politics and that is successful in their study based on the models they use is generally dishonest, which is maybe not a surprise to some people in the room, but to have that kind of evidence base is kind of interesting. Like if I was to map that onto your model, right? If we think that sort of rent seekers would never want to say that they're rent seekers, they always want to demonstrate themselves as people that are fundamentally interested in policy and reform. We might actually end up just generally seeing more like the equilibrium where you have just two rent seekers, right, competing. If we think of them as being primarily dishonest folks, because they would never want to say they're not rent seekers. So there's some new empirical literature that might be relevant.
Yeah, and it resonates with kind of the broad idea of my paper.
Yeah.
So maybe one way of framing this is that, so instead of talking about candidates, maybe you can talk about parties, okay? And then for whatever reason, one party has more interest in implementing the reform, okay? And then that may give you, so essentially they are all equal, individually taken, they are all equally rent seekers, but one is in a coalition that is really interested in this reform, and then the other one is in a coalition that is less interested in any set of reforms. So that could give you the difference, even if the candidates are kind of equally, equally bad in terms of being all rent seekers. No, then the other thing that I was thinking is within the setting of this model is that the incentives for a policy-oriented candidate or party is maybe to commit to some level of pre-commit to some levels of transfers or vote buying ex ante, because otherwise you know that you lose election for sure. And then, so it might be something that we observe in reality, even candidates that we truly believe that they care about some reforms, they might be, sending a lot of signals of, of this type of, policies that we all know that they are just to buy votes. Well, because otherwise you're in a disadvantage. So they are trying to overcome this disadvantage. So that could be also a possible, connected to Jeff's point, a very interesting extension in which you allow the policy-oriented candidate to do something in a stage 0 or stage 1 to handle this, and then how close they will end up looking if you allow that to just two pure rent seeker candidates, no? Because essentially it might be the case that, well, while the policy-oriented candidate has the ability of using this technology ex ante, well, he will end up looking or doing more or less the same as a rent seeker. So in that case, you are even reinforcing more what Jess was saying. It's like, look, even if you are not actually a rent seeker, you end up behaving like a rent seeker once you have that option, okay? So essentially, it doesn't really matter who you are, but in equilibrium, you end up being the same.
There is that the empirical evidence suggests that that equilibrium is reinforcing, and so that it's actually beneficial for more people to become dishonest
Yes,
right over time, because that's how you continue to win.
correct. So essentially, it's that could be interesting. So it's like if it costs you, if it has a personal cost of using this technology, then that gives you a mechanism for dynamically start selecting the ones that do not have to bear that cost. So essentially, you end up with rent seekers, no? Okay, but then whenever you have two rent seekers, you don't get big. Can you get big
Can you go back to that?
differences in both shares?
In the pooling equilibrium, yes.
In the pooling, yes.
Yes, because they randomize, and one can randomly pick something small, and the other one can randomly pick something high, and that generates a large work margin.
Okay. And then the other option is that essentially, so here the rent seeker, so care about rents and the other cares about the policy. But this could be a matter of degree, no? So you're more rent seeker. No? They are all rent seeker to some extent.
Right.
There is one that is more rent seeker.
Yeah.
So essentially, in that case, go to the case of two rent seekers, but one more than the other one. That may also give you, in the pooling equilibrium, what is going to give you also potentially high both margins, because the one that is more rent seeker will do what in that case? Or it will just beat you by a penny.
So, I mean, as you said, the one that I call policy oriented can be seen as a lower level rent seeker.
Correct.
No, it's basically the same.
It's basically the same. So so if you have that essentially, so you can keep the main result about big differences in both shares, no? Okay, I see.
I do think that this is maybe as much a theory of voters as it is a theory of the candidates, just because of if this is sufficient to essentially demonstrate the margins that you're talking about, then it must be the case that transfers matter significantly more than the platform, right? And then what it sounds like we're talking about is primarily like clientelistic countries, right? Do you feel like that's where maybe your model is meant to apply? Or how are you thinking about that?
I mean, as Gustavo said before, it can be seen as like a last minute addition to the platform as well. Like, I'm going to give, I don't know, maternal leave or something like that. It can be just something good and universal that at least most of the people will care about.
But those are those targeted then? Or are those like, are they?
They're not targeted.
They're not targeted.
Universal.
You can
So then-
focus on the pivotal voters, okay, and then
Yeah,
the
but
others
I'm
pay.
thinking, right, because then, I mean, then it's essentially you're saying the platform and the transfers are equivalent, they're just taking place at different points in time. That's kind of the argument.
The costs are different for the candidates. Transfers and platform have different costs.
Is that because we could think of transfers as very short-term one-off policies? Is that kind of what you're thinking about that?
I just parameterize it. So transfer have one marginal cost is one, and policy platforms have a marginal cost of a letter A that can be larger than one or smaller than one, but it doesn't make much difference.
Well, a little bit technical question, but so you are doing this in the context of probabilistic voting. So, well, probabilistic voting, you have those ideological shocks, no, that you add.
Yeah.
So, can this be interpreted as essentially you are with those last minute platforms, you are kind of inducing an ideological shock in your favor?
So not inducing, there is a shock. So there is a population of voters and they have a random bias for candidate A or B, even if they don't know the type of A or B, they just have a random bias.
Right.
And that induces some noise. And that noise induces a distribution of votes, and you want to win by, you know that if you want to win election, you want to target 0.5 plus epsilon, right? So it's too expensive to win by 0.7 or 0.8. So you want to win with 0.5 plus epsilon. So you target basically the median voter. And the median voter is the one who happens to have no bias. No random.
So it's different.
I mean, if we are thinking about this as essentially different degrees of costly policy offerings, essentially based on timing, we're starting to think a little bit about like, I mean, it seems to me we're almost starting to get into like October surprise literature, right? Where we're thinking about the extent to which, based on the types of the candidates and the timing, it makes sense to either reveal or not reveal credible information that will essentially shock a particular section of the voting population, right, into one side. That's a relatively low cost thing to do, right? That could induce, we don't really think of it as a transfer, but I mean, again, as you've described, these are sort of like just kind of names for what we're talking about, is sort of like lower high cost components, right? And if they're low cost, we might think of it as one-offs because there's not some sort of sustainable endurance or engagement by the politician, which is not unlike a strategic information revelation at the last minute before an election. And so I'm sort of wondering if at that point, this is then really becoming a much more of a temporal model of politics, where we sort of think about like, at what point based on maybe the type of candidate, at what point in the election cycle or at what distance before the actual election are we seeing transfers, which may be in the form of like an October surprise type thing.
Okay, I'm not aware of that literature, but so October surprise.
It's essentially the literature about why is it that we see scandals in October? Well, we see scandals in October because people are about to vote at the beginning of November, and we want the last thing they see about the opposing candidate to be something bad. Turns out, obviously, there's no reason for anybody to believe that because everybody would release that information, but they still do it anyway. And so there's some question about why they would do that. And in part, it's Oppo research with the idea that like, oh, if I'm the last person to like it, right, Hillary's emails. Right, this is one example. It's a little early for an October surprise, right? It's really earlier than that. But there is this argument that this is a thing that happens, and it's essentially it's this last minute ideological shock.
Okay,
frankly, right, to try to swing it in your favor based on where you think the voting electorate is.
I'll take a look at it. Thank
But
you.
it just sort of depends on if you're still seeing this as a temporal, right? As if this is fundamentally a temporal model, like right, where the transfer is something that happens late.
Yeah.
Right, based on information you already have, or if it's really just the mix of the platform and transfer.
Basically, the model doesn't change, it's just the way I frame it, which depends where I want to publish it. In econ, it doesn't matter too much, but if it's in political science, it matters a lot.
That's true. Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to frame it. You got a lot of different options.
Thank you.
So do we have more questions? We are reaching 3 o'clock. I know that we started a little bit late for the second one. So Johann, do you want to wrap up? 30 seconds.
I mean, yeah, it's so there are other, how can I say, empirical concept, like testable consequences of this model. The main one is I don't know if you're aware of it. There is a large literature of regression discontinuity on close elections, and so this model would challenge that idea, because in regression discontinuity, you're assuming that the guy who lost by epsilon is very similar to the guy who won by epsilon, but this model is actually showing that they are very different. Which challenges that idea of implementing regression discontinuity in closed selections.
Right? That's a very interesting implication. And it's very large, the literature.
Yes.
Very
Very big.
Right, thank you very much.
Well done.